Sorry. Okay, welcome everybody to our latest show and tell, 22nd of September. We're really excited to what we're going to share with you today. We're going to do the usual, go over the project goals quickly, explain to you some of the sprint's focus, and let you know the work we've done. Take a step back and look at the wider delivery plan with the time we've got left. Have a look at what we're going to do next sprint, and obviously feedback and Q&A. I do encourage people to ask questions, ask any question you like throughout, but there'll also be an opportunity for you to ask a question at the end if you weren't able to as we go through the presentation. So we've got the problem statement here. So this effectively is what we're working towards. We believe that trying to digitize the management license service will improve outcomes by simplifying the service and create a sense of ownership for license holders and streamline the business process. So that's what our team is working towards. And we usually go through the slide each time, so I won't spend too much time dwelling on it. In terms of the alpha goals and hypotheses, we've been through this before. Just to kind of add to this, what myself, Reba, and Alex have done this sprint is kind of try to turn these into metrics. So we've been kind of speaking to some of the councils and looking at how we can measure some of this. So, for example, if we want to improve the practice of license holders, we would like to, maybe see a reduction in number of suspensions annually, if that's possible, a reduction in the number of new applications that are processed due to missed renewal dates. It is still a work in progress, but we wanted to show you what we've kind of started thinking of so far, and obviously this is important for the alpha assessment as well. And also we want to make sure that we can reduce time on back-end processes that directly impact the license holders, and the way we want to try to measure that is a reduction in cost and time spent chasing to ensure license remains valid. We know that's a big problem, and increased staff time available to be spent on other more proactive license activity. So that's kind of what we've kind of come up with as product metrics. Probably needs a bit more refining, but that's one of the things we kind of looked at this sprint. So practice and simplification. So the goals of the last two sprints were, and I will hand over to Ash because I realised that you're supposed to be presenting this slide. Ash.
Hello. Yeah, it's okay. So we've got here the goals of the last two sprints because we had to move the date for the last show and tell just a little bit further. So we're technically into the one after now. But what we've really been focusing on is number one, recruitment, which was for the round of research that we've just completed, which Verity will take us through soon. Creation of the prototype, which I'm going to demo for you in a moment. But then also doing the prototype testing. So Bradley and Verity were doing a tour of the country again recently. So we'll get an overview of that, and also trying to do the synthesis. So that's what we're in the middle of right now. So that's looking at all the outcomes from the research, bringing that together, trying to create a story from it, and looking at what recommendations that we want to add for when we look forward to Beta and beyond. So what I thought we might as well jump into is I'll show you all the prototype that we created for the testing. So let me share my screen. Some of you won't have seen this before, so feel free to put your hand up, add some comments, ask me any questions as we go through it, but I will take you through it now. So this is what we call a Figma prototype. So this essentially means that we haven't built this. This is just designs that I have linked together. Can you all see my screen okay? Yeah. Just double checking? Yeah, brilliant. So this isn't a built service. This is just designs that we've linked together for a prototype just for the purposes of testing. We did 3 different prototypes. All the content was the same. It was essentially just a different logo top left. So we did one for Basingstoke, did one for Rushmore, did one for North Tyneside. This just so happens to be the Basingstoke one that I have open. So when we did the first round of research, we tested the prototype that had already existed within Rushmore when this was done last time. The content of that prototype actually tested really well. So the things that people could do on it, it had like the to-do list, it had what was called a journal at the time, which showed what people had done and like the activity. But some of the feedback that we got in from last time we tested it and the last round was that it was a little bit everywhere, and we had quite a few drivers that got a bit lost. They weren't sure where they were. And a few people said to us, is there no way to just try and bring it all together to try and make it really simple? Which is what we've tried to do on this one. So for this prototype, I've mainly followed GDS, so if it looks a bit similar, that's why. I've tried to follow the design system from the government. So we've got basically a nav at the top here. So you've got account, home, profile and settings, which is where they can look at name, date of birth, home address, and then also some contact preferences at the bottom around how they'd like to be contacted. Some of this stuff isn't, this is what we're saying, should we go into beta? Some of this was just food for thought. So for example, with contact preferences at the bottom there, that was a really great prompt for us when we were talking with the license holders, just around how would you like to be reminded? How do you currently get reminded? And just really prompt that discussion that Verita will take us through afterwards. So some of this you might think, oh, that's really big to add in, but to be honest, it was just around us asking questions around it as well. So you can see at the top here, we've got what we call the task list. So you've got tasks for you to complete, which are there to do. And you can see that we've got these status tags here as well. So you've got an urgent status task, and you've got one that's just in to do. This was around us trying to get an understanding from the license holders what the difference they think are between those two. For example, if they logged in and saw they had an urgent task, would they do that straight away? Would they also do the to do straight away? Just trying to understand that reactiveness for how they wanted to complete these things. We also got quite a few comments in the first round when we tested the last prototype around people wanted to log in and just see what licenses they had. So this one obviously has someone who has a driver's, vehicle and operator license, but we obviously have people who are just drivers. We did test this across all of them, which didn't really cause a problem, just around seeing if they understand this. Was it useful to them? What more information did they want on there? And all things like that. You'll notice we've got a button that says apply for a new license. This doesn't do anything. So this was mainly around when we were in the first round of testing. A couple of license holders said to us, is there a way we could do new licenses on this system? The current scope was around managing a current license and trying to do renewals. But a couple of people did talk about applying for new licenses. So like I said we put that on there just basically to ask them around it, see what the thoughts were, did they have any strong feelings, things like that. But it's not something you can see there that we've really delved into. It was just, we added it in to see what people thought. So on the task list, you've got the to-do. You've also got pending. So these are tasks that are waiting approval, and we've got this little in review status there. And we've also got completed. So these are tasks that have been completed. We've got there the last 30 days, but again, it was something that we wanted to test with people. How long would they like to see tasks that have been done? Do they really care about that? How important is that to them, to just try and get a bit of feelings around it? So this wording and the way that we've done these stages here are one of the main things that we wanted to test. Do people understand what pending means? Do they understand in review? Basically, all of the language in this was something that we wanted to test within the prototype. So some of the journeys that we had through this were, for example, enter your DVLA driving license and share code. If they clicked into there, you've basically got this field here where it says, please check your code is case sensitive, and just giving bits of hints on there where they can enter it. One thing we also wanted to test is how they might get support throughout this prototype. So say, for example, if they went to go into this page, what if they got stuck? Would they immediately go into the councils? Would they ring up the councils? Because that's obviously something that we would ideally want them to self-serve to try and see whether they can get help before contacting. So we've got these little tooltips here at the bottom where basically says, for example, how do I get a code? And it will say to generate a code, you should visit, and then it has external links out to, this could be Gov websites, this could be any useful information on the internet, this could be absolutely anything at all. We were talking as a team around, did we want a big help section in this? But actually, we felt that we just test this for now, just around doing the external link, seeing whether people found that useful. How do the license holders feel around getting basically sent to another link to get that help? So that was something that we wanted to test as a first iteration of this. So once they click submit, that task then goes into pending. We were testing that as well. Do they understand that it's gone into the pending column? Do they know what this means? Do they understand that that basically means that it's with the council to action that task and to complete their side of it and do the checks and things? We also had another task on here, which was basically around uploading. just for the example of this, we did upload a copy of your passport just because we know at some point they need to do that. But this was mainly asking them around uploading documents in particular, mainly because when we were asking in the first round of research around what people really struggled with, uploading pictures, scanning documents in, things like that seemed to be a real pain point for some of the license holders and drivers, mainly because not all of them had scanners, not all of them were very confident taking pictures on their phone and then transferring that to a computer and uploading that. So we were really teasing out here how people felt around this, how they would approach this, how they would upload these images and these scans on here. Again, we've just got this tooltip on the bottom, which is linking them externally to help if they needed that help on there. But that's very similar to the last bit that we showed. So yeah, once they've done that, you can see there are basically, there's no tasks left to complete. And then they've got all of these tasks that are awaiting approval in the pending column. And the completed basically exactly stay the same. So this was the main thing we were testing, as well as understanding how useful seeing these current licenses are to them, since that was a big thing that people mentioned in the first round. They wanted to come in, see when things expired, see when they had to action these things by, whether in 3 months' time they would have to submit something, all that kind of stuff. People were saying that would be very useful for them. And I think I mentioned it before, but the other main part we were asking around was these contact preferences. So we're obviously looking at reminders, how we can bring people into this system, what that journey is. So for example, if a task goes from pending to completed, or if a task goes from pending to do, what's the communication around that? How would people like to be told about that? All those kinds of things. So that's the main parts of the prototype. Before I switch around, did anyone have any prototype specific questions you wanted to ask? No? Awesome. We could jump back to the slides then. If you want to, Julia?
I think you're on mute, Julia.
So sorry, thank you. Took me a while to find the unmute button. Yeah, so the next part of the slides is the research recruitment overview, if there wasn't any questions for Ash, which I don't think there was. Okay, take it away, Verity.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. So recruiting for the second round of testing followed a very similar structure to the first round, which consisted of councils sending a letter co-written between themselves and us to all the license holders in their boroughs. Having done this with moderate to high success in the first round, we were hopeful that we would fill the 3 in-person slots for each council's designated day. So as you can see on the slide, we recruited by filtering participants who expressed interest in being approached for a second round. We had a good list of potential participants from the first round who had expressed an interest in being a part of the second round of testing. Within the potential list, we had to screen even further and make sure that we were still meeting our high focus target and our preferred user. This meant that we approached drivers with private hire and hackney carriage licenses or one-man bands before we looked to operators. We also had to make sure not to speak to many of the people who we had spoken to in the first round so that we didn't skew our data. We recruited by emailing each person individually with a new letter relaying dates, session details, and times. So we emailed each person to make sure that our emails didn't end up in junk folders of the recipients. This was a laborious task, which meant that we emailed over 60 people one by one, using their name where possible to create that sort of familiarity with them. We also personalized the letters for each council with the addresses, dates, and times to help reduce any error that may occur. We also recruited by creating a new screener and a shorter letter for the councils to send out when we didn't receive any responses. So as you can see here on the slide with the letter that's got the word Basingstoke on top, that was a shorter email that we sent. For Rushmore, we received a good number of responses and we were able to book our slots quite easily. But with North Tyneside and Basingstoke, that proved more difficult, as many drivers from the first round had said that they didn't feel like they had enough time to book out of their day to come and speak with us. And we feel this is probably the case the second time around as well. We had a very short period of time between sending those emails and those session dates. And as we grew closer to the time that we had to travel to those sites, we hadn't received many responses. So what we simply did was we requested the council send a newer, shorter email and a brand new screener, which you can also see on this slide here. From these council prompts, we still didn't receive many replies for North Tyneside, but we did manage to fill the slots for Basingstoke. So we began to formulate a backup plan, which was to basically have longer in-person rank visits to ensure that we were meeting our quota of about 4 participants a day and gather enough data so that we could fill our final report and those recommendations that we have to give. Longer rank visits usually mean that it's a type of research known as guerrilla research or pop-up research. And guerrilla research is more of an on-the-spot type of approach, which means that you make sure that you don't crowd that person, you explain who you are clearly. We also lent on the licensing teams very heavily to continue up that feeling that they aren't being crowded and that no one's being interrogated and that no one felt uncomfortable by our approach when we asked them to fulfill the different prototype tasks and when we asked them questions around the tasks that they had just completed. Next slide, please, for me, Julia. Thank you. So we left London with 1 participant for North Tyneside, 2 for Basingstoke and 3 for Rushmore. We weren't worried too much because we had agreed on this pop-up style of research, and as I said previously, we had decided it was going to be 4 participants per area, which should be plenty, and that we would be able to speak to those 4 people because of those pop-up sessions. We also secured an iPad for participants to use for those sessions outside of the office. So we had the iPad and we also had printouts of every single page on the prototype for note taking so that we could note everything down whilst we were on the street, but we could also move all of those notes from the paper onto our online Miro board. So we travelled to Basingstoke on the 14th of September, where we conducted 3 in-person sessions at the civic offices and 4 pop-up research sessions at 2 taxi operator offices. On the 15th of September, when we went to Rushmore, we held 4 pop-up research sessions at taxi ranks and in various locations. 1 in person and 1 remote session at the civic office, at the council offices. And on the 19th of September, while we were in Tyneside, we spoke to 2 participants through pop-up sessions and 2 through in-person sessions at the license office. We in total had 17 sessions with the participants, which means that we met our target with each of the boroughs, and we also gathered a large quantity of data. In each location, we traveled to several different taxi ranks, gathering as much information as possible. And we also made sure to respect their taxi fares and their constraints. So if anyone came, even whilst we were speaking to them and said that they needed to be taken somewhere, we would absolutely back off and they could continue their ride. Which also helped them to not feel so startled by us coming up to them and saying, "Hi, would you mind having a few minutes to talk to us?" At the end of these sessions, at the end of all of the sessions, we confirmed that we were able to speak to drivers where English was not their first language and drivers who had varying literacy levels when it came to digital use. But we did not manage to speak to drivers with dyslexia and various needs like that. Next slide, please, for me, Julia. Thank you. So once we had uploaded all of the feedback from our 17 sessions onto our synthesis board, we began to basically do a deep dive. So we split the research into driver and operator and looked at each piece of feedback very, very carefully. We have been keeping the project hypothesis in mind. So we studied each and every one with a view of understanding the usability issues encountered and also actions that we would have to take to address them. As you can see on the slide, orange is the improvements that had been suggested by the participants. Red was pain points and issues that were found. And green was positive feedback, which also could include their personal information on how they use digital in their own lives and who helps them, but also around the aspects of the prototype which they felt were positive, and also positive feedback that also included improvement suggestions. So what we did was, by having this color tier system, we were able to understand which parts had the most red, which parts had the most green, and which parts had the most orange, and look at what our next steps will be from there. Next slide for me, please, Julia. Thank you. So we unfortunately couldn't tell you every single positive and negative from all of the drivers. But what we have done is shown 3 examples of each here that were the most common with these participants. For both operators and drivers, we have ensured that all feedback is free of bias regarding non-digital and English as a second language participants. We have not put words into their mouths of these participants by guessing what they were trying to say or guessing their understanding of the prototype. We didn't fill any gaps that participants may have created with our own knowledge and expertise. It's very much that everything they told us, we wrote down word for word, so that it was completely about what they felt and what they said and what they wanted, and very much how they felt going through this prototype. So we also noted down if any of the participants maybe were feeling slightly stressed, or if they looked confused, if they felt confused, if they even asked, what is that? We noted everything down so that it would all be taken into consideration of how they felt in that moment. We also haven't elevated the design's worth in terms of making it seem like the participants weren't able to understand the design because they were not smart enough to understand it due to their challenges. We have treated everyone the exact same, and we felt like that was key to making sure that this data that we've gathered and whatever we put into that final report is as strong as possible and as user-focused as possible. So participants with different understandings, backgrounds, and barriers still give us very valuable insight, and we had to make sure that we represented that. But what I will do is read 2 examples of each, one a positive, one a negative. So one of the positives was that the drivers found that the application was simple and an improvement over the current and existing service. Many of them said that they were happy that there was a lack of paperwork. A lot of them had talked about documents that they had to keep sending. But one of the negatives was, of course, the low digital drivers who became anxious at the thought of using this digital service, which we had guessed would be the case, but this became apparent to us. Next slide for me, Julia. Thank you so much. And lastly, for the operator findings, as you can see here, to pull out one positive, they felt that it was time-saving, it was simple, and it was an improvement. But one of the negatives that came up quite commonly was they were worried how they would be able to see all of the driver licenses on one prototype, if it would be a case of it being a list, or if it would be that, like with the current prototype, if it would be grey blocks showing every single driver license, as some felt that that would be too much, like a case of sensory overload. There was some worry around the task list being quite long because of the amount of drivers that they have, and how would they know that they're getting through it? They would feel a bit hesitant to see this giant stack of tasks and feel like they would never reach the end. So that was some of the feedback that we got on that as well. But in closing, our last 2 sprints were extremely valuable and gave us enough data to understand how we can continue our next steps for the prototype and what the service could do to help drivers and potentially improve their capabilities with data, and also hopefully help them to feel a sense of worth, and like they can do something, whether it's digital or whether it's something that's by themselves, and it won't rely on them. They won't have to rely, sorry, on their family members to help them. But yes, that's everything. So I'll pass back over to Julia if no one has any questions.
Thanks, Rosie. Yeah, just a quick show of hands. So just a second to see if people have got any questions. Victoria.
Sorry, I did that in error. Sorry.
No problem. Okay, if there's no questions, I'll move on then. Feasibility. So in terms of the next sprint, what we want to do is obviously, because we're going into the final week effectively of the project, we want to collate and document all findings and recommendations, and this will form part of the report. Effectively, what we want to do with this is we want to kind of get an understanding and share it, what our achievements were, what were areas of improvement, what future initiatives and recommendations can we make. And the whole point of this is obviously to increase awareness of what we've done through the project. We also want to agree to be processors as a team and the stakeholders. So again, we want to kind of like start thinking about how we can harmonize the operational practices and collaboration and have more of a streamlined workflow. That's quite a big one. So that's something we want to look at that together as and it will form part of the report and the final show and tell. In terms of the delivery plan, as I said, we're going into our final week. So most of our sprints have been a 2-week sprint, except for sprint 0 and this final sprint here. So really it's kind of collating the activity and the user research that we've kind of been through with you today, and start forming recommendations as part of the final report, which we've started drafting already. And that's about it from us. Does anybody have any questions for us or anything you want us to clarify or go over with you today? I will take that as a no. Ash.
Can I ask the councils, in terms of the prototype and what we tested, was there any surprises in it? Was there any things that you thought might be missing? Was it what you were expecting?
Leah, please come in.
Yeah, so it was literally just obviously with the prototype, and it was the passport page that I saw. I'm guessing that it's not a finalised version because not all of our applicants actually required to bring their passport in. They can do birth certificate and national insurance number, and it said that they needed to supply that. I was just like, oh no, I don't need to. There is other options of getting around that sort of thing. So I just wanted to make sure that wasn't the finished one, if that made sense.
Yeah. No, yeah. All data in the prototype was basically me inputting that. So that was probably Maya on that side where I was like, oh, everyone will need the passport from all the evidence that's all listed out. But you're right, not everyone did. I think a couple of the drivers mentioned that to us as well while we were doing the testing. But yeah, for sure, that's not the finalised list, but nice eagle eyes for noticing.
Amazing. Thank you.
Alex.
Hello. Yes, thank you very much for this. I've missed a couple of these show and tells, so it's really good to catch up on how things are going. I guess my impression of the research so far is that broadly we're seeing things in line with our hypotheses. Is there anything that's standing out at the moment where that may not be true?
Ash?
Yeah, I don't know if it's that. I think the hypotheses, we were looking at them this morning and we were saying actually it's broadly where we thought it would be. One of the things that has been interesting, which I didn't call from the start, and I don't know how much it was brought up in the Rushmore project, was around this service potentially being an app. So when we were speaking to drivers and license holders in the first round of research, we were asking them, where do you imagine you would do these tasks? Because is it something that you would do if you're in the taxi while you were waiting for customers and things like that? And a few people said, oh, I would do it when I get home. So then we had a look at, okay, well, if we did something on an iPad or if we did it tablet wise, which is why it was desktop based, we'll see whether people would use it that way, whether they'd want it on mobiles. And a few people said to us that an app would be good because they'd be able to easily scan things and especially when I said before that scanning was a problem for a lot of people, a lot of them did say, oh, well, it's easy to take pictures on an app, or I'll prefer to use it as an app. And I hadn't quite thought of it that way. I just thought it'd be like a mobile website. So not that it doesn't agree with the hypotheses, but I think that's the only one where it popped up and I thought, oh, I hadn't really thought about that before, which is interesting.
Well, yes, the website versus app debate, I'm sure, will be a fun one for all concerned. Okay. Yeah, it's the other thing I guess that stood out is that expectation of people that they can use this to apply for a license, which I completely get. I think I guess my reflection is how do we do that in a way where people don't feel and get a jarring experience of moving from something that looks very WK and very well designed to something maybe made by one of our suppliers, to make an application that feels very different and not very integrated. So yeah, I think something for us to bear in mind there. But thank you very much, and thank you for your hard work.
Thanks, Alex. Alan.
Yeah, it's just something on the dashboard. I quite like the new application button. Most of our contact with existing license holders is when they renew the license. So I think a very simple renewal button would be great, so that we just go into the dashboard, if you want to call it that. And that's probably the big thing they will do over the period of the license, whether it's every year, every 3 years, or whatever it is. So I quite like the button. Dead easy, see it straight away, but you want that for renewal. And I agree. I think the application here for new applications is it's a go at that, definitely.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, that, Alan, because we were talking about that either this week or last week on actually with a renewal, would you count it as separate tasks, or would you count it as one action that has multiple tasks within it? And like, how would that fit within this? So it's something we've been discussing and something that we'll put as recommendations for beta to think about that. We did kind of tease out that I think a lot of the existing license holders who wanted to apply for a new license was mainly around vehicle proprietors and around them wanting to apply for a new vehicle license when they get a new car. So there was a few findings like that that we pulled out, which we'll put in the recommendations. But yeah, it's the renewal one was really interesting. We've been chatting about that recently.
Thank you, Alan. Alex.
Judo. Yeah, I guess kind of stepping back on the process we're in with this alpha. We have particular to this one kind of tried to focus in our original brief on the in-life tasks of a license, but I think it's true to the approach and to user research that you don't then shut your ears to what your users are telling you, and that of course is where applications have come in. And we kind of got two dimensions to that, because we've got someone who's already in the world of licensing, who wants a new license, but they're familiar with that. So vehicle owners being a classic one, they frequently will change their vehicles, so they're going through that process quite a lot. But we recognise that as potentially quite a different journey to someone who's coming to be a taxi driver for the first time, and many of the things they will encounter along the way are going to be unfamiliar, and they've potentially got decisions they need to make that just existing users don't have. So yeah, it's definitely something we've learned more about here, and we're still reflecting, I think, on what that means for the recommendations at the end of this. But it just goes to show that you just have to listen to what you hear during user research. And on that front, I did get to sit in on one session as an observer, which was great. And in the course of doing this work, there's obviously a lot going on, and you don't always have time to absorb what user researchers are learning on a day-to-day basis when they're doing the work. So I just want to tip my hat to everyone, particularly Verity, because that was an incredible amount of information you've managed to relay there. Very well done, really appreciate that. It's great to see it all in that way.
Lovely, thank you so much. Any other questions before we close off the show and tell? Any final thoughts? No, okay. Well, thank you so much for coming along and for all of your questions today. Our final show and tell, still need to send an invite out for that, but that'll be for the 6th of October at the same time on a Friday. So we hope to see you there and share our final findings. But thank you so much for today and have a lovely weekend. Bye, everybody.
Thanks all.